talking about the decision-making section of XAT, and we will see how we will approach this section. First of all, what exactly is XLRI looking for while testing candidates on decision-making? We will also see what kind of questions do we usually see in this particular section. And then we will go through some do's and don'ts for this section, right? So myself, Shubham Khanna, I take care of the operations at T.I.M.E Jamshedpur, and I'm also an XLRI alumni. So I'll be taking you through this entire session today. Now, there's no better way to put it across that decision making really is a test of leadership. But what kind of leadership? Now, what XLRI is basically looking for, and if you see the logo of XLRI or if you see their motto, the logo says excellence and integrity, right? So, the really what is the basis of this is that excellence and integrity both go hand in hand. One without the other is really not possible, or really is not what is encouraged in XLRI. Even if you see the motto for the greater good, right? So XLRI believes in creating socially responsible business leaders. So therefore, that answers the question as to what kind of leaders. It is basically socially responsible business leaders, right? So we will not we will not take this as making someone a social worker, so to say, but really someone who can balance business goals with ethics and values, right? So that balance is very important. And throughout this session, we will talk about how we can make those balanced decisions, right? So decision making section in itself is a very unique section, and that is exactly what was required to test the leadership skills of a candidate. Unlike the academic part of the test, which of course is tested in the other entrance exams as well. But what is unique about XLRI's entrance exam, that is that, is its decision making section, because it is the only kind of test that can test you that can test the candidates beyond the academic excellence, because it focuses on practical, ethical, and managerial decision making, right? There needs to be a perfect balance of all the three. And how does it do it? It basically gives you real life scenarios. It tries to simulate real life scenarios from business cases or real life cases, something that you will see in your professional and your personal life on a daily basis. Uh, and what is unique about these kind of questions is that there's no one single correct answer. There will be multiple correct answers, but there'll be one most appropriate answer, and that is choosing that most appropriate answer is the trick to this particular section. It evaluates you on critical thinking, ethical judgment, also stakeholder analysis. And what is stakeholder analysis? Basically, any situation or any scenario that you come across, there are various people or various characters, so to say, in that particular scenario. And you should be able to see that scenario from everyone's perspective and then make a decision, right? So you need to analyze the situation from every stakeholder's point of view. And that is one very basic approach to solving decision-making questions. And we will talk about these approaches at length in a few minutes, okay? Now, how is it designed? As the slide already says, that it is designed to find leaders, not just good test takers or not just academic excellent students, right? It is designed in a manner, and only those people can crack the DM section who have those leadership qualities, right? So it basically tries to measure your managerial wisdom and your integrity, right? Which, of course, the other sections are not designed to test, right? I would not say it cannot test your managerial wisdom, but those are not designed to test your managerial wisdom. And therefore, the decision making section becomes the differentiator in that. And really, we have seen over the past few years that your decision making section is usually the make or break for that. People give other exams as well, and you all might have appeared for most of you have appeared for cat as well. So the remaining two sections of that are quite similar in terms of the difficulty level, in terms of the kind of questions, the kind of topics that it covers. But really, the decision making section, which a lot of people mistakenly assume that it is only based on common sense, but really it is not. It is not just common sense. You have to understand that if you don't practice this section, it is very easy to get or to mark a biased answers based on your experience. And you will not be able to maintain that balance that XLRA is looking for. And therefore, it becomes imperative that you practice these questions, understand what exactly is the college looking for, right? Now, how does XLRI do it? What kind of questions does it ask? So there's six basic or six broad categories that I can list for the decision making problems. And mostly you will see any decision making section that you've come across will fall into one of these criterias or even more than one, right? The most commonly asked questions are on ethical dilemmas, basically conflict of values. Uh, there was a very good question that I came across where uh, loyalty versus integrity was being tested, right? In a situation where there was a friend who was basically cheating and you know about it, but you go ahead and tell the authorities about it, or do you not? Right? Something that I think most of you would have faced in your life, sometime or the other, right? Uh, and therefore, a lot of you might think that loyalty is to be favored over here over integrity, and some of you might think integrity over loyalty. But really, you have to find the balance between the two, right? Yeah, you can't sacrifice one over the other. And even if you do so, there has to be a very strong context behind it, right? So the scenario that I gave you is not the complete scenario, but it was just a gist of what the case was. Once you read it completely, you will have the complete context. And that is when you have to try and maintain that balance. Let's understand that there is no gray area in ethics. And a lot of students that I teach, have this argument that from my perspective, this is ethically right, and from your perspective, it might not be. But really, that is not how ethics work. There is no gray area. There is black and white. There is a line that if you cross that, you are beyond ethical boundaries. And if you stay within the limit, then you are ethically correct, right? So once you have that kind of a thought process where you see ethical decisions objectively, then I think you will minimize the mistakes that you make. The second kind of question that you will see is business cases, right? Again, a very commonly asked question. In these business cases, questions can come on strategy, can come on marketing, can come on improving efficiency, which is basically operations based, so on and so forth, right? So you can see examples that I've given. It is market entry, cost cutting, product launch, all of these kind of questions, right? The third is the HR questions, or maybe HR based or people management questions, right? Now, it might not necessarily be a business case, so to say, when I say HR or people management. It could be a group project, for example, right? Or it could be making a decision as a teacher in a college or in a school, right? So basically, people management skills are being tested over here. Personal dilemmas, something that you see in your personal life. It could be a family issue, it could be a family conflict, or a social conflict for that matter, right? Something that basically is around you and away from the professional setting is what a personal dilemma really encompasses. Then there are certain cases on policy and governance, right? Uh, Now, this again can be business cases or could be non-professional cases. For example, let's say there is a society association, a society that you live in, which has an association, and the society has really shortage of water, and then they let's say talk to the municipality and they let's say build a small water tanker for the society, right? And then and then there is a quota of water that is allotted to each household, but some people try to steal water, right? So that kind of cases. Now, what you should do in such a case as an association to ensure that everyone gets their share of water, or maybe water is not misused, so on and so forth, right? So these are kind of policy or governance based questions. So the question might be based as if what kind of policy should you make so that this entire process runs smoothly, right? So those kind of policy making questions in non-business settings can also be a part of decision making. Of course, these are most commonly asked in business settings. These can also be asked in context to how the government should make those policies or how the authorities should make those policies, right? The last type, and which is we've seen these kind of questions coming in that in the last couple of years, is analytical and numerical decision making. Not saying that it did not come prior to that, but in the last couple of years, the number of questions which are more numerical in nature, which has a few concepts from DI that can be used, those questions have appeared in that. And therefore, this year you can expect the same. There should be some questions which are DI or numerical based decision making, right? Which basically does not mean that you have to do a lot of calculation as such or apply a lot of data interpretation techniques. Not really. But then for making a decision or to come to a conclusion, you will have to keep in mind or consider the data that is given as well, right? Okay. Let's see a few examples for these, right? A lot of people ask me, what exactly do you mean by ethical dilemma? Let's see a scenario that is given over here. A domestic worker in a housing society is fired for a stolen ring, and the ring is later found. Now, while reading the case, what you have to understand is one, the context, the background. So, we are talking about a housing society over here. So, that is the background that you have to understand, right? Then you need to understand who are the stakeholders over here. So, here we are talking about a domestic worker, right? And of course, this is one excerpt from very small excerpt from a case. When once you read the entire case, there will be multiple stakeholders, right? And then what is the conflict? So from this, let's say we understand that we have fired someone wrongfully. We've terminated someone wrongfully, right? So it is a personal or an ethical dilemma question, right? So, three things that you will keep in mind while reading the cases: the context, the background. Secondly, you will keep in mind who are the stakeholders and how does a particular scenario and a particular decision affect the particular stakeholder. And then what is the conflict? तो ये तीन चीज, these three things, if you keep in mind while reading the case, that is when you've understood the case, the conflict properly. Then you will come to the question. And the question, what really you will look for in the question is, uh, according to which stakeholder are you making that decision? And this is very important because this decision can vary from person to person, from stakeholder to stakeholder, right? So you have to be very careful while analyzing the options to understand that who is making the decision, who is the stakeholder. More importantly, what is the objective of the question, right? So in this case, what is the most appropriate action to take now, and what policy can prevent future injustice? So if you see the first part of the question, most appropriate action, which means there is a very general objective that is given over here. And in such cases, you have to ensure that the decision is balanced, which means that it should be good for the social worker as well, the domestic worker. It should be good for the society as well. And it should be good for the individuals living in those society. So it should benefit all the stakeholders in such a case, right? Whereas when we see the second one, we need to make a policy that prevents future injustice. Now, here the objective is to prevent injustice, right? So rather than again thinking about a completely ideal solution, I will keep in mind that the end goal is what? To prevent future injustice. And therefore, my answer would be guided by this particular objective, right? Second case, let's say interpersonal dilemma or HR dilemma, where we talk about people management. So, here the scenario is what? That at an IT firm, an employee discovers that the annual bonus received by only 1% of the staff was awarded based on relationships but not performance. Now, that is ethically incorrect, right? We all know that this is ethically incorrect. Now, the dilemma, what is the dilemma over here? Should she accept the bonus, decline it, or confront the system? Right? Now, you see, the kind of cases will put you to thought uh, that what should be done in such a scenario. And what will confuse you even further is your personal bias. That very clearly you can start thinking that, oh, I've seen this scenario in my company and I know what people do. So I think that should be the correct answer. But really, that in most cases is guided by your personal experience and your bias, right? Which probably may or may not be the correct answer because it is not the ideal way, it is not ethical, it does not keep in mind the long term benefits, rather than it just keeps in mind your short term benefits. Tomorrow, the same decision, you can be at the receiving end of it, that you've worked extremely hard, but because you did not have a very great relationship with the decision maker for the bonus, and you were declined of the bonus, right? So the same scenario, next year you can be at a receiving end, right? So you have to make the process correct. You have to ensure that it is ethically correct. It is good for the organization, for the morale of the employees, and therefore a perfectly balanced decision will be a correct answer, right? You have to keep in mind that as an organization, why this is important is, if the morale of the employee is lost, then no one will be willing to work hard for the company, and that will lead to degrowth or even reputational damage to the organization, right? So more than short term, you have to start thinking long term in terms of making a balanced decision. Business strategy. As I said, these can be based on strategy, marketing, operations kind of cases, right? Here, let's say a scenario where company must choose between launching product A, which is a high profit, small market, a niche market, or product B, which gives you lower profit margins, but has a broader appeal, has a greater market, addressable market, so to say. Only one can be launched. So, which launch plan ensures best long term gain for the company? Right? Of course, there will be other information also given to you, and based on that context, you will make that decision. And here, the objective of the question is what? It has to ensure long term gains for the company, right? So if you have an option which seems to be perfect but is only short term, then that is not the correct answer. If you have an option which is only long term, which only takes care of long term goals of the company, is a right answer, is a good answer. But also, if you have another option which takes care of short term goals as well as long term goals, then that is even more balanced, and that becomes your correct answer, right? Now, let's take a case of policy or governance where, following the wrongful firing of domestic worker, the housing society needs a new policy, which is again very similar to case one that we did, right? Here, there is an ethical dilemma as to what action should be taken. But when we talk about making a policy in a certain scenario, it falls under a policy governance question, right? So, which rule best protects the worker's right without being impractical for the residents? So again, you see, we are protecting workers' right, but we also want to ensure that it is not impractical for the residents. So you see, that is the balance that you have to maintain while answering this question, right? Let's see. There's some unwritten rules, of course, right? Regardless of the scenario, you have to make sure that these things are followed, right? And you will see there are certain kind of patterns in the kind of questions that are being asked, also the kind of options that are given, and what is the correct option in various scenarios, right? A very common theme that you will see is ethics versus profit, right? And here, you cannot sacrifice one over the other, not at all. And therefore, you have to maintain a balance. When I say maintain a balance, you have to be ethically correct, but at the same time, you can't be loss making. So you will choose an ethically correct option, which is the most profitable, right? So among the options, you'll first eliminate those options which are not ethical. And then among the ethical options, you will see which is the most profitable, right? So plain and simple logic and a process that you can follow. When we talk about stakeholder balance, right, you will consider who all are the stakeholders in a certain scenario, and you will see how they are affected in this particular scenario. So here the aim is that it should be beneficial to all stakeholders, or it should minimize the harm for all stakeholders, right? So again, a combined decision or a more balanced decision. Another common theme that you will see is long term versus short term. And here, we, in general, we try to make long term benefits more priority over short term gains, right? We give long term benefits more priority unless it is otherwise specified in the question. So sometimes the question will specifically ask you that tell me what policy should we make or what decision should we make to get, let's say, short term gains, or let's say maximum revenue in the short term, right? So certain situations, certain questions will ask you to keep the short term gain in perspective. And there also, of course, my objective is short term, but if I have an option that takes care of short term as well as long term goals, then that becomes even better, right? But essentially, my goal is to maximize short term profits. If that is my goal, then I will go for a short term an answer which satisfies the short term goals. But otherwise, if it is not mentioned, You always go for long-term benefits over short-term. Of course, if there is an option that balances both, that becomes even better, right? What you have to avoid in certain cases is, in fact, in all cases, is extremes. When I say extremes, drastic actions. For example, firing someone immediately without investigation, right? Those are extreme options, right? Uh, so therefore, emotional decision making is something that you should absolutely avoid, because that is where you will make the maximum mistakes, because it is guided by your personal biases. Your emotional decision making is guided by your personal experiences and biases. So therefore, that is what you need to avoid. You have to strictly stick to the case facts and the objective, right? So the context has to be in place. What are the constraints has to be in place. And then what is the objective of the question, right? So you cannot go for extreme options. Now, a good way to see whether your answer is correct or not are these four questions that you can ask for yourself. The first one is the ethical lens, which is it fair and transparent? Right? Sometimes, if you have a doubt whether this is correct or not, whether this is ethically correct or not, this is the question that you ask yourself. Is it fair or transparent? If not, then it is ethically incorrect. The second is who is affected or who is affected by the decision that you are making. So that is called the stakeholder lens, right? Which stakeholder is being affected and what is the gravitas of that effect, right? So I will try, for example, I will try to maintain a balance and minimize the harm for all stakeholders, or I will try to maximize the gain for all stakeholders. So what is the gravitas and who is affected? Is it a long term lens or not? Is it a long term decision or not? A decision that gives you long term benefit or not? So, the question that you essentially ask is what will be the impact in, let's say, 1 year time or 5 years time or 10 years time, whatever the context is, right? So, long term can be subjective in terms of whatever the context is, right? So you keep that long-term lens while answering the question. And the last one is, can it be publicly justified? That we popularly call this as the newspaper test. Can you publish this about your company in a newspaper, for example? If you're doing something and you're not sure whether is it right for my reputation or not, just ask yourself this question. Can you publicly justify it? Can you put it out in a newspaper? If yes, then absolutely you can definitely go ahead with that kind of an answer. Right. So these four lenses, if you put while answering the question, I think you will be able to maintain that balance that XLRA is looking for. Now, I will now talk about a 5-step framework to approach a decision making question, right? Most of it I have already covered, but I'll just go through it in a step by step manner, right? So the first thing that you do is read and isolate. That is, you will actively read the passage. When I say actively read the passage, it means you take care of all the facts and data. You keep in mind all the facts and data, and then understand what is the core issue. What I mean to say is, what is the conflict in a particular situation? That is what you try to analyze in the first reading. Secondly, you will map all the stakeholders, right? Who all are the parties involved? How are they affected? So on and so forth, right? So the first two steps is concerned with understanding of the business case or the personal dilemma case, right? Then what you do is you try to keep in mind the question. Each question will have an objective, and therefore the answers will vary according to the objective and the stakeholder who's taking that decision, right? That we've already talked about. Then we come to analyzing the options. The first thing you do is apply the ethical lens and eliminate all unethical options. Unethical options are never correct. So you'll first of all eliminate all unethical options. Then you will eliminate the extreme options, right? Because these two kind of options are never correct. So you eliminate unethical and extreme options. And then among the remaining options, you will see which is that option that satisfies the objective and maintains a balance. And when I say maintains a balance, it should be a long term, sustainable, ethically correct solution that obviously uh, should meet the objective of the question, right? And that is called an optimal decision, a decision which shows managerial wisdom and integrity, right? There are two tactics that you can use while deconstructing a scenario, right? The first one is, as I already discussed, active reading and stakeholder mapping, right? So again, you separate facts from opinions, right? Uh, which basically means that you do not let your biases and your opinions affect your decision making. You strictly stick with the facts, right? And it is very easy to mix the facts given in the passage and mix your opinions, especially when you are very much aware of these kind of scenarios, right? In all the other kind of questions, uh, if you are aware, if you have already seen a particular situation, you might feel comfortable answering those questions. Here, it can work against you as well because your personal bias might affect your decision. So that is where you have to be careful. Second is to identify the constraints. A lot of times you will find questions where there's a budget constraint or there is a policy constraint or there is an urgency, and therefore these becomes your constraints. So you have to keep in mind all of these and then pinpoint or figure out what is the dilemma that the case is talking about or the protagonist is facing, right? So this is the part of active reading. And then the second part is stakeholder map, right? What is its primary interest? Who is the stakeholder? What is its primary interest? What does he want? And then what is the impact on that stakeholder? Whether is it a positive impact or a negative impact or a neutral impact? Yeah, the second is the art of elimination. Again, something that I've already discussed. You first eliminate the extreme and the unethical options. You also eliminate such options which are very short-sighted, right? You try to always answer keeping the long-term objective in mind, right? And then some options sometimes are absolutely out of scope, which means those are irrelevant to the question. So you will eliminate all of those options. If you eliminate so many options, in the end, you are usually left with two options, right? And from those two options, you then choose the most appropriate answer, right? So the art of elimination is again very important. Now, the usual question that students ask is, what is the way of choosing the final answer among the two options left? So again, go back and read the objective of the question and then see which option solves the objective of the question and is a balanced answer. And that is your correct answer. These are some of the don'ts for decision making, common traps that you should avoid in decision making. And again, I have talked about some of these, but I'll again go through it once more. The extremist trap. Now, what is the extremist trap? Again, as I said, you can't go with an option which is extremely harsh or extremely idealistic, right? Or extremely lenient, right? So you have to maintain a balance, right? So do not fall in the trap of choosing an extreme option, right? Emotional bias. Again, emotional thinking. will most oftenly lead to an emotional decision, which will not be backed by the case facts, right? And therefore, you should avoid emotional thinking and emotional bias. You should always stick to the facts and try to logically conclude your answer, again, based on various aspects that we talked about, right? The next is you should not or never ignore data that is given in the question. Your data is only going to help you arrive at the correct decision. If anything, it will only help you to arrive at the correct decision. So never ignore data. Never assume that the data given is just a noise, right? It most often will have an impact, have a bearing on the question and its answer, right? So never ignore the data. Next is do not forget the framework. When I say framework, do not forget your constraints. So for example, if you have a budget constraint, uh, you can't, let's say there's a budget constraint and the revenue is going down for certain reasons. Let's say you're not able to deliver, if you're a logistics company, you're not able to deliver the products in a timely manner and you have a budget constraint. Now, your answer cannot be hire more employees, right? Yes, it seems to be a very obvious answer when we say that there are no enough, you fall short of delivery partners to uh, deliver the product. Uh, what comes first in my mind is to hire new delivery partners or extra delivery partners. But if there is a budget constraint, then really you can't hire more employees, right? So do not forget your constraints in a passage. Empathy overload, and something that I mentioned at the very beginning, that you don't have to become a social worker. Yes, you have to make an ethically correct answer, but you also have to maintain a balance with the business needs. So you do not have to become a social worker, but you have to become a socially responsible manager or a leader, right? Short-term myopia. Now, this is very common when I teach students that people tend to take a short-term approach, right? कि short term benefits के लिए we give up the long term benefits, or we in fact do not even realize that what are the long term benefits. We only look at the short term benefits, right? So never do that. That really values a long term approach, right? So most often than not, a long-term approach is a correct answer over a short term, right? Unless as I said, only when the question specifically asks you to make a short-term decision, only then you go for it. Otherwise, you always go for a long-term decision making. Strategy by attempting the way, right? Understand that there are 22 questions in your decision making section, which is basically 6 to 7 cases, approximately 7 cases, right? Now, you should not be taking more than 2 minutes per question, which essentially means not more than 45 minutes for this section. And 45 minutes is more than enough for this section, which takes me कि which tells me basically कि एक सेट में कितना टाइम लगना चाहिए. So basically per caselet you should take about 6 to 8 minutes, and which really gives you about 2 minutes per question, and that is more than enough to answer a particular case. If you try and overthink, then you are losing time and you're also making mistakes, right? So keep a steady pace while answering the decision making section. Remove your personal biases. That is the most important thing. So while practicing questions also, you will have to keep in mind that your personal biases should not guide your answer, right? It should be analyzed, the case should be analyzed impersonally, that is without your personal biases, and always stick to logically reasoning your answers. Okay. Now, the focus of the question. What should be the focus while selecting the correct option? What is the objective of the question? So here a very good example that is given is the best first step is different from best overall solution. Sometimes the question asks you what is the best first step that the management should take. But really, we do not pay a lot of attention to this. And because we've read the case properly, we know this is the conflict and this is the best possible solution. And we go ahead and mark that particular solution. But that is maybe it is the correct solution to the case, but not to that particular question. The question was asking best first step. So you have to really focus on what the question is asking. Make sure that you practice previous year papers for sure, right? uh, of course, T.I.M.E provides a lot of decision making material and classes for students aspiring to give XAT. But beyond that, do practice a lot of PYQs, because those are a credible source of questions for decision making, right? I do not see a lot of people making the right kind of decision making questions. And that is why I do not suggest students to go for these free materials for decision making section, because really I've seen those questions that they make, and they are absolutely nowhere close to what really the XLRI paper looks like, right? Uh, do check it for yourself and take that decision. But for that, you will have to solve the PYQs. So solve the previous year papers, see where or what source gives you more credible questions. And remember, only the questions are not enough. Only solving questions are not enough. You will have to analyze the questions properly. That is, not just what is right, but why is this particular option correct, or why is this particular option better than all the other options, right? So that kind of a reasoning when you do, that is when you will be able to crack the decision making section, right? Now let's see some of the past trends. In 2023, the decision making section was fairly moderate, in fact easy to moderate. There was only one challenging set. In 2024, the difficulty was increased just slightly, right? There were a couple of difficult sets, but otherwise, the entire paper was again easy to moderate. In 2025, again, the difficulty level was increased slightly. Now, understand, there has always, in the past couple of years, there's always been a very slight increase in difficulty level of decision making. And that is mainly because of the introduction of data-based sets or data-based decision making. But apart from that, it has been fairly similar all the 3 years. So the difficulty trend has been moderate to difficult kind of sets. And therefore, if you just practice enough, uh, I think there's actually enough time to practice right now. In the next 20 days, you can easily ace this particular section. What is a good attempt, and is what students ask me. And when I say good attempt, I'm targeting somewhere around a 90 percentile, a 90 plus percentile for decision making section essentially means that you should get about 14, 15 correct. Uh, what we encourage students to do is to answer all questions in decision making. This is not a section where you should leave a lot of questions unless you absolutely do not understand the case, which rarely happens in case of decision making. So the readability is very easy. So we encourage that you answer all questions and you get at least 14, 15 correct to ensure 90 plus percentile. And if you get about 14 to 16 correct with, let's say, 4 or 5 questions incorrect, you can easily land up somewhere around 95 percentile in decision making, right? So out of 21 or sometimes 22 questions, that is the kind of score you should be targeting. And not just decision making. In fact, I tell my students, if you really want to get into XLRI, just getting an interview call is not enough, because converting an interview call at a 96, 97 percentile is very, very difficult. Very difficult. Right? So if you really want to convert XLRI, please target 98 plus percentile, 99 if possible, and which essentially means that you target a score of 15 in each of the three sections. Right? Now, as I said, there has been an increase in data-driven cases and socially relevant topics in the past couple of years. So that is where you should definitely focus and practice more, right? That has been the latest trend. But of course, practice all kinds of questions. Make sure that you keep in mind the tactics, the various approaches that we have just talked about. And you can, of course, reach out to us again if you need any additional help in cracking this section or XAT in general, right? Again, no matter the trend, the core principle remains the same, that you have to make a balanced decision, keeping in mind all the stakeholders, keeping in mind that you value long term over short term. That is, the impact should be more sustainable, and then ethically correct. You have to be ethically correct. So you have essentially, if you see broadly, what we are trying to do is we're trying to balance business requirements, and which is like profitability or efficiency. We're trying to balance that with ethics, people centric approach, sustainability, so on and so forth, right? Uh, so that becomes very important, right? So have a perspective. How do you basically clear this? If I have to just summarize the entire uh, presentation that I gave you right now, you should have a perspective of what XLRI is trying to test you on, and then what kind of decision making sets will they give you. You will have to understand the kind of patterns, and I talked about certain patterns that you will most oftenly see in these decision making sets. So identify those patterns, practice on those patterns, and remember the process, the five-step process. That is to read and isolate, to map stakeholders, to put an ethical lens, eliminate extremes, and eliminate unethical extreme options, and then select the best or the most appropriate answer, right? With this, we come to the end of my presentation. Uh, right. Thank you so much, guys.